Good day, Mr. Townsend and class. Today we will be discussing our experiment, which we called Lost in Translation. Language is a universal system of communication that uses sounds and symbols. It provides us with a means of expressing ourselves and communicating among one another. Language is universal in that every individual in every culture uses language to communicate. However, the use of sounds and words, as well as the rules for combining words to form sentences with specific meanings, differ across languages. These rules for combining words to form meaningful sentences is referred to as syntax, and each language has its own syntax. This experiment aims to determine whether semantics, that is, the meaning of words and sentences, could be lost in the process of translation from one language to another. We have considered the concept of broken telephone and how this may cause a change in the form and meaning of a phrase or a sentence. As different languages have different syntax, a phrase such as "my hand is in warm water" that is translated from English to Zulu may result in an alternative meaning of the sentence in Zulu compared to the intended meaning of the sentence in the original language, which is English. Thus, we aim to determine how semantics could be lost in the process of translation, and whether the meaning of a phrase will stay the same when it is translated into a different language with different rules.
Research has been done on the broken telephone game, but when you're listening to someone, you're engaging in a process called parsing. Parsing refers to mentally grouping words together to understand the meaning of a sentence as we listen to it. The misunderstanding in the game might be due to the person whispering too softly, which causes mishearing, or ambiguities in the language, such as if the person used the word bark, it could either be a dog barking or the bark around a tree. The length and the complexity of the words in a sentence might also cause confusion. For example, if the sentence is too long, they won't remember all of the words. And if the person uses words that the other person never heard before, they won't get the meaning of the sentence. That's why at the end of the game, the sentence tends to be changed a little bit or completely.
I'll be doing the hypothesis for the study. For those of you who have forgotten what a hypothesis is, don't worry, I will remind you. Basically, a hypothesis, it is a statement of predicting the relationship between the independent and the dependent variable. So it is an uncertain answer to the question that is posed by the research. In order for us to claim that we have a good hypothesis, it should be refutable, it should be testable, it should be written in a positive and logical flowing way. So our hypothesis is that meaning will get lost in word-for-word translation from one language to another language. And the statement of assumption is based on syntax. The simplest way I could explain syntax is that syntax is sort of like the boss who determines which word goes where in a sentence in order for us to make sense. So these rules are different in different languages. For instance, in English, there are different rules of where words go in a sentence in order for that sentence to make meaning, to make sense. So in Zulu also, words are put in different places. So if we were to translate from English into Zulu directly, the syntax rules will be violated, most probably for the target language that we are translating into. And secondly, the other point that we need to take into consideration is the culture. An individual, like for instance, somebody that speaks Zulu might have a different culture of understanding the words that are being translated verbatim, which might constitute a different meaning. So there are a lot of other factors that come into play and complicate the issue of translating word for word. So I'll just make a quick example. If I was to say, if you drop your pants here, you will have a based result. From one culture, that might be understood very differently, whilst if it was translated into another language, say maybe French, it might have a totally different meaning. So therefore, syntax and culture, context, and all these other factors tend to complicate translating word for word from one language into another language. Our null hypothesis in this instance will be that meaning will not get lost in translation. And this supports the statement that our hypothesis is a good hypothesis because it is refutable. We can actually go out there and find that meaning actually does not get lost in translation, but it remains the same from one language to another language. And the second part is that it is testable. We can be able to observe the independent and the dependent variable interacting. In this instance, it's the language and the meanings. And lastly, it is written in a positive and logical manner, therefore it flows and it makes sense. By that brief explanation, I think I've demonstrated to you what our hypothesis is and how good it is. And from here, I'll hand over to my colleague who will be doing the experimental design.
We'll be discussing the experimental design parts of our study. Now, with regards to our variables, our independent variable is language, and our dependent variable is semantics. The experimental design we'll be making use of is the between subjects design, which aims to compare different groups of individuals. Now, our general goal is to determine whether differences in semantics getting lost in translation exist between one control group and two experimental groups. The experiment will involve 18 individuals, half male and half female, ranging between the ages of 21 to 25. And they will be split into 3 groups: a control group, including 6 fluent English-speaking individuals, an experimental group, including 6 fluent English and Zulu-speaking individuals, and another experimental group, including 6 fluent English and Afrikaans-speaking individuals. The experiment will be explained to the participants in English, with the idea behind this experiment coming from the concept of the broken telephone game. With regards to the English control group, the experiment will involve whispering a sentence to one of the participants and telling that participant to whisper it to the next participant until it reaches the last participant, which is the 6th individual, who finally repeats it out loud. This will occur 3 times with 3 different sentences. With the experimental groups, it will involve whispering a sentence to one of the participants and telling that participant to repeat it to the next, but this time the sentence needs to be repeated in their language, so either Zulu or Afrikaans, word for word until it reaches the 6th participant, who finally repeats it out loud. This will also occur 3 times with 3 different sentences. Now, our 3 different sentences are: my hand is in hot water, killing 2 birds with 1 stone, and beats around the bush. All groups will be tested at the same time in 3 different rooms, with each group being facilitated by a researcher. The participants will be deceived before the experiment begins, in that they will be told that the study is about checking how long it takes them to translate from one language to another. This will ensure that the translations are quick and genuine and not necessarily perfect. With regards to quantifying the results, with each sentence condition, the total number of semantic errors per group will be noted. We will also take a look at each participant and note their errors individually.
In our study, we are aware that there are confounding variables, and we have done as much as we possibly can to limit the effects of these confounding variables in our study. So the confounding variables that we as researchers have identified and have tried to limit are age, and how we've limited this is by ensuring that our participants are aware and have dealt with the concept of broken telephone before. And so we've ensured that our participants are between the ages of 21 and 25. Another confounding variable is hearing, and we have limited this by ensuring that all our participants undergo a very basic hearing test prior to the study to make sure that their hearing is adequate enough to participate. One of the other confounding variables is fatigue. We have limited this by making sure that all our participants receive a meal prior to beginning the study, as well as asking them to fill out a form prior to the study, finding out how many hours of sleep they had the night before and whether they are tired or not. And we've also further limited this by ensuring that the study is conducted during the day, added an hour such as 10 in the morning to make sure that the participants have been awake for a while and they are wide awake. One of our other confounding variables is fluency, and we have tried to limit this by making sure that all our participants undergo a very basic fluency test in English
And then the participants who are involved in the Afrikaans and in the Zulu groups will undergo an English fluency test as well as the Afrikaans fluency test if they're in the Afrikaans group and the Zulu fluency test if they're in the Zulu group. One of our other confounding variables is culture. The reason it's a confounding variable is that we understand that different cultures understand certain sentences differently, as well as certain phrases, certain words exist in some cultures and not in others. Environmental variables such as the room setting, ventilation, things like that is one of the confounding variables, and we've limited this by making sure that the same researcher will be in the room during all of the conditions, that proper ventilation will be provided, that the same rooms will be used for all the conditions, making sure that the room setting is the same. So the way we place the tables and the chairs and everything will be the same for all the conditions. We have tried as researchers to do the utmost to ensure that our confounding variables have been accounted for and that we've limited them as much as we possibly can.
Results outcome. The alternative hypothesis was accepted. Word-for-word translation of spoken or written text from the source language to the target language will result in meaning of the source language being lost. We therefore reject the null hypothesis. The English-only participants control group resulted in the same meaning message being delivered between the participants. However, when two or more dialects were involved, translation of the message was lost. The English-only control group made a total of 0 errors in semantics. The Afrikaans English group made 15 and the Zulu English group made 22 semantic errors overall. The average number of errors across the English-only control group was 0, across the Afrikaans English group was 2.5, and across the Zulu English group was 3.6 recurring. The t-test conducted showed that the two translation group means are significantly different to the control group's mean. The p-value equaled below the significance level of 0.05, and is therefore a significant result. Hence, the null hypothesis is rejected. We need to consider some confounding variables to be able to understand our results fully. Semantics is affected by translation between people who in essence each have a culture of their own. People are individuals who each develop and grow in a unique environment and who are influenced by unique experiences. As Cramsch 1998 says, language is inextricably bound up with culture. Language expresses a common cultural reality. Cramsch speaks of a discourse community as being a group of people using language to meet and address social needs. In essence, this is what the results of our experiment show. Between English-only participants, the spoken meaning message was effectively communicated. But when another discourse community norm was added into the equation, the spoken meaning message was lost.
Ethical considerations. The American Psychological Association maintains a set of ethical principles that researchers are governed by and that assist in the research process. Informed consent will be obtained before conducting our study in an understandable language so that participants are aware of the purpose, duration, and procedures. They will be informed they have the right to withdraw at any point of the study without any consequences and will be provided with contact information of the researchers if they have any questions. No harm will be caused to our participants as there are no strenuous activities or substances involved in our study. Active perception will be used and will be informing participants that the purpose is to examine reaction time of translation from one language to another. Debriefing will occur at the end of the study to convey all the objectives of the study as well as to minimize psychological harm. Confidentiality will be maintained throughout the study and participants will be informed of who will have access to the results, the use to which information will be put, and will be assured of accurate and honest reporting of the results. We're going to attempt to uphold these ethical considerations by ensuring that our informed consent form is in written format so that participants are fully aware of what is expected of them and do not feel coerced into participating. Confirmation will be obtained beforehand that participants can engage in each activity to minimize any harm that may be caused. Debriefing will occur at the end of the study and will consist of dehoaxing and desensitizing. During dehoaxing, the true objectives of the study will be explained, and we will explain to the participants that deception involved that the risks, The benefits outweigh any possible risks that could have occurred. Desensitizing, we will explore the results of the study and acknowledge any feelings participants have, and then we will explain the results to minimize any harm from occurring.
As my colleagues have shown through our experiment, meaning does in fact get lost through the process of translation from one language to another. An interactionist approach to parsing is at play here, as meaning, which is central, becomes lost through syntax, which distorts the meaning of the phrase as hypothesized. Therefore, when translating a phrase word for word from one language to another, for instance, from English to Zulu or Afrikaans, this will result in the meaning being lost. Now, what this means is that the directly translated phrase will not correctly reflect the syntax of the Zulu language, which will then not reproduce the intended message or semantics of the original phrase. Now, with regards to recommendations for future research findings have noted that there are research gaps between research and clinical practice. Now, according to John Wallace, knowledge translation is a discipline that attempts to understand these barriers and facilitators to knowledge transfer. Now, what he found is that there is an assumption that there is an eventual improvement to healthcare. It is seen as somewhat of an instantaneous act, when sometimes it can actually take up to 17 years to implement the evidence. Or psychotherapies like cognitive behavioral therapies may wound up being underused as treatments for depression. Now, it is the opinion of John Wallace that knowledge translation as a method can be used for closing knowledge to action gaps, therefore ensuring that there is optimum care and no research gaps. Now that we brought everything to a close, don't forget to use your emojis so that information doesn't get lost. Thank you for watching.